government actors who were never elected to the government used private sector actors to suppress information on the eve of an election that, based on polling afterwards, likely did influence the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. That was election interference of the highest order.
Vivek Ramaswamy recently went on the Lex Fridman Podcast to torch the Democrats and the government's use of social media to interfere with the election by censoring hot topics like the Hunter Biden laptop and so much more. Let's see what he had to say.
I think the facts of the backdrop of the 2020 election actually really do matter. I don't think you can isolate one particular aspect of criticizing the 2020 election without looking at it holistically. On the eve of the 2020 presidential election, we saw a systematic, bureaucratically and government-aided suppression of probably the single most important piece of information released on the eve of that election, the Hunter Biden laptop story, revealing potentially a compromised U.S. presidential candidate. His family was compromised by foreign interests, and it was suppressed as misinformation by every major tech company. The New York Post had its own Twitter account locked at that time. And we now know that many of the censorship decisions made in the year 2020 were actually made at behest of U.S. bureaucratic actors in the deep state, threatening those tech companies to do it, or else those tech companies would face consequence. I think it might be the most undemocratic thing that's happened in the history of our country, actually, is the way in which government actors who were never elected to the government used private sector actors to suppress information on the eve of an election that, based on polling afterwards, likely did influence the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. That was election interference of the highest order. So I think that that's just a hard fact that we have to contend with. And I think a lot of what you've heard in terms of complaints about the 2020 election, whatever those complaints have been, take place against the backdrop of large technology companies interfering in that election in a way that I think did have an impact on the outcome. I personally believe if the Hunter Biden laptop story had not been suppressed and censored, I think Donald Trump would have been unambiguous. I think the president of the United States right now would be Donald Trump. No doubt.
I agree with that as well. It wasn't even just the Hunter Biden laptop thing that was suppressed. It was any COVID information, especially around that time, there was lockdowns. So all people had were social media. So literally everything that most people saw was through social media, which the government used to control what the people saw. And it was a direct influence on how people saw everything. It was as if the government kind of found a loophole on how to control free speech and make it not so free.
About it, in my mind, if you look at polling before and after and the impact that would have had on the independent voter. Now you look at, okay, let's talk about constructive solutions, because I care about moving the country forward. What is a constructive solution to this issue of concerns about election integrity? Here's one. Single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday with paper ballots and government-issued voter ID to match the voter file. I favor that. We do it even in Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the United States. Why not do that everywhere in the United States? And I'll make a pledge. I'll do it right here, right? My pledge is, as a leader in our movement, I will do everything in my power to make sure we are done complaining about stolen elections if we get to that simple place of basic election security measures. I think they'd be unifying, too. Make Election Day a national holiday that unites us around our civic purpose one day. Single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday with paper ballots and government-issued voter ID to match the voter file. Let's get there as a country, and you have my word. I will lead our movement in whatever way I can to make sure we are done complaining about stolen elections and fake ballots. And I think the fact that you see resistance to that proposal, which is otherwise very practical, very reasonable, nonpartisan proposal, I think the fact of that resistance actually provokes a lot of understandable skepticism. Understandable skepticism of, okay, what else is actually going on? If not that, what exactly is going on here?
Well, I think I agree with a lot of things you said. Probably disagree, but it's hard to disagree with the Hunter Biden laptop story, whether that would have changed the
We
results
can't
of the
know,
election.
obviously.
Right.
I looked at some post-election polling about the views that would have had, and I can't prove that to you, but that's my instinct. It's my opinion.
I think that's just one example, maybe a sexy example of a bias in the complex of the media, and there's bias in the other direction too. But probably there's bias. It's hard to characterize bias as one of the
Let me ask you one question about, because there's bias is one thing, bias in reporting, censorship is another. So I would be open-minded to hearing an instance of, and if I did hear it, I would condemn it, of the government systematically ordering tech companies to suppress information that was favorable to Democrats, suppress that information to lift up Republicans. If there was an instance that we know of government bureaucrats that were ordering technology companies covertly to silence information that voters otherwise would have had to advantage Republicans at the ballot box, to censor it, I would be against that. And I would condemn that with equal force as I do to the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story, suppression and censorship of the origin of COVID-19. All happened in 2020. These are hard facts. I'm not aware of one instance. If you are aware of one, let me know, because I would condemn it.
Most people in tech companies are privately, their political persuasion is on the left. And most journalists, majority of journalists are on the left. But to characterize the actual reporting and the impact of the reporting in the media and the impact of the censorship is difficult to do. But that's a real problem, just like we talked about, a real problem in immigration.
But there's two different problems. I just want to sort them out, right? Because I have a problem with both. You talked about two issues, and I think both are important, but they're different issues. One is bias in reporting. One is censorship of information. So bias in reporting, I felt certainly the recent presidential debate moderated by ABC was biased in the way that it was conducted.
Absolutely. There's a difference between bias and reporting. There's always going to be bias in reporting. That's why it's important that we encourage, more a center, nonpartisan journalism. But I mean, yes, there are right reporting, there are left reporting, but there's no doubt about that the government, Mark Zuckerberg came out and admitted that the government asked him to censor the Hunter Biden laptops stories because, it's it's fake news, it's false information, stop the spread of false information. And then you always have people on the Democratic side you always see Mark Zuckerberg and owners of social medias on trials, not on trials, but in hearings, testifying in these things. And when it's a right wing, like a Republican grilling them, it's always like, you're censoring too much. And then whenever it's a Democrat person grilling them, you're not censoring enough. The left is always asking for more censorship, and the right is always asking for less. But there is a difference between just a bias in reporting and then directly manipulating the media and what you can view on social media to influence elections and for people to go your way. They admitted that they did it in Time magazine, in that article that came out after the 2020 election was over.
But that's a different issue from saying that voters don't get access to information through any source. So this Hunter Biden laptop story, we now know that it contains evidence of foreign interference in potentially the Biden administration and their families' incentive structure. That story was systematically suppressed.
By the way, if you're liking this video so far, make sure you give the video a like, subscribe to my channel. Let's get back to it.
So in the United States of America, if you wanted to find that on the internet, through any major social media platform or through even Google search, that story was suppressed or downplayed algorithmically, that you couldn't see it. Even on Twitter, if you tried to send it via direct message, that's the equivalent of email, right? Sending a peer-to-peer message. They blocked you from even being able to send that story using private messages. That, I think, is a different level of concern. That's not bias at that point. That's outright interference in whether or not, that's outright interference in the election. Let's do a thought experiment here. Let's suppose that Russia orchestrated that? What would the backlash be? Let's say the Russian government orchestrated the U.S. election, they interfered in it by saying that tech companies, they worked with them covertly to stop U.S. citizens from being able to see information on the eve of an election. There would be a mass uproar in this country if the Russian government orchestrated that. Well, if actors in the U.S. government bureaucracy or the U.S. technology industry bureaucracy orchestrated the same thing, then we can't apply a different standard to say that if Russia did it, it's really bad and interfered in our election. But if it happened right here in the United States of America, and by the way, they blamed Russia for it, falsely, on the Russian disinformation of the Hunter Biden laptop story, that was a false claim. We have to apply the same standard in both cases. And so the fact that if that were Russian interference, it would have been an outcry, but now it happened domestically and we just call that, hey, it's a little bit of bias ahead of an election. I don't think that that's a fair characterization of how important that event was.
Okay, so the connection of government to platform is this should not exist. The government, FBI, or anybody else should not be able to pressure platforms to censor information. Yes, we could talk about Paul Durov and the censorship there.
Sure.
There should not be any censorship, and should not be media bias. And you're right to complain if there is media bias, and we can lay it out in the open and try to fix that system. That said, the voter fraud thing, you can't right a wrong by doing another wrong. You can't just, if there's some shady stuff going on in the media and the censorship complex, you can't just make shit up. You can't do the fake elector scheme and then do a lot of shady, crappy behavior during January 6th and try to shortcut your way. Just because your friend is cheating a Monopoly when you're playing Monopoly, you can't cheat. You shouldn't cheat yourself. You should be honest and with honor and use your platform to help fix the system versus cheat your way.
So here's my view is, has any U.S. politician ever been perfect throughout the course of American history? No. But if you want to understand the essence of what was going around in 2020, the mindset of the country, we had a year where people in this country were systematically locked down, told to shut up, sit down, do as they're told, unless they're BLM or Antifa rioters, in which case it's perfectly fine for them to burn cities down. We were told that we're going to have an election, a free and fair election, and then they were denied information systematically heading into that election, which was really important and, in this case, damning information about one of the parties. And then you tell these people that they still have to continue to shut up and comply. That creates, I think, a real culture of deep frustration in the United States of America. And I think that the reaction to systematic censorship is never good. History teaches us that. It's not good in the United States. It's not good at other points in the history of the United States. The reaction to systematic, coordinated censorship and restraints on the freedom of a free people is never good. And if you want to really understand what happened, if one really wants to get to the bottom of it rather than figuring out who to point fingers at, that really was the essence of the national malaise at the end of 2020. It was a year of unjust policies, including COVID-19 lockdowns, systematic lies about it, lies about the election, that created a level of public frustration that I think was understandable. Now, the job of leaders is to how do you channel that in the most productive direction possible. And to your question, to the independent voter out there evaluating, as you are, do I think that Donald Trump has exhibited a lot of growth based on his experience in his first term and what he hopes to achieve in his second term? I think the answer is absolutely yes. And so even if you don't agree with everything that he's said or done in the choice ahead of us in this election, I still believe he's unambiguously the best choice to revive that sense of national pride and also prosperity.
I completely agree. And I want to say this. What drives me crazy about people like Lex Fridman or other people who just who say, well, Donald Trump just made stuff up about the election. I honestly, I'm always baffled and confused by this. Legitimately, I'm always baffled and confused by, well, he just made it all up. Did you not see the same clips that we all saw online? Did you not see poster boards being posted on the windows so the observers couldn't see in during the counting? Did you not see video clips of the suitcases that were being ushered in? Or what about when they made up the story about the pipe bursting that turns out didn't really happen. I believe I might be remembering things wrong, but I remember there was something that was false about that. And then there was the magic jump of Joe Biden. Like Trump was like leading, and then all of a sudden there was this big spike in jump of Joe Biden. I'm just saying that there was a lot of shady things going on around that time. They portray it like Donald Trump just made up this story, like, it was stolen from me, guys, and we just like, oh yeah, no, duh, okay, we believe you, master. No, everyone, including Trump, were seeing these clips online, and it made us think there is something shady going on. And what really drives us crazy is that there was no investigation done. That's all we all wanted, was some kind of looking into this. But instead, we were brushed off like, no, wrong, fake news, wrong information. Like, even if what we were seeing was wrong and there was logical explanations for everything, we were never addressed in a respectful manner about it. We were just brushed off. And so that added to the whole, like, there's something shady going on. And then we were told, again, gaslit, like, not only was there no election fraud, but this was the most securest election of all time. Another Democrat thing where not only are you wrong, but it's the complete opposite of what you believe, which they always like to do. So, yeah, not only were we wrong about that there was election fraud, but this was actually the most securest, which is like, this is the most securest, the first election where we could mail in our ballots willy-nilly. There was unsecured drop boxes. You're telling me that this was the most secure? Obviously that's a lie. And all we wanted was for someone to look into it. Okay? Hillary Clinton, turns out she made up the whole Russian thing. There was a whole investigation about the Russian scandal, and it turned out it was untrue. But there was a whole investigation. Yet with 2020, there was like no effort to see if what we were seeing was true and to quell our fears. Nothing. So wouldn't it be understandable if people would go on January 6th to march on the Capitol to protest what we were seeing? I don't think Trump made it up. Whether there was election fraud or not, Trump didn't just pull this out of his butt as like, oh, I'm just going to use this. No, he saw what we were all seeing, and he was pretty much reflecting what we were all thinking. Ladies and gentlemen, do you guys agree with me or not? Do you agree with Lex Fridman? Do you agree with Vivek Ramaswamy? Leave your comments down below. Give this video a like. Follow me in my social media links down below, and I'll see you guys later.